Federal Reserve just had another one of its meetings, and it cut interest rates by 25 basis points, 0.25%. This is kind of along the path that everyone expected. 0.25% was the most bets were placed on that to be the interest rate cut. We can talk about that and how it kind of relates to the economy. There's nothing really interesting to talk about, though.
No, like the Federal Reserve cutting rates by 50 basis points in its last session basically laid out what it was going to do for the next 3 months.
Yes.
And it already told us that it was going to do 25 basis point reductions over the next couple of months, every month. So this isn't news. This is just they're going down the path that they've already laid out, that is already aware to all the financial analysts. Everyone who's following the monetary policy of the U.S. government already knew all this.
Yes.
It would have been a shock if they didn't do this.
Yeah.
So really, there's no news. The Federal Reserve is on track to keep reducing by 25 basis points down until they get interest rates to like 3%.
Yes. The one thing I'll mention about like the economy, inflation is down. Like we're PCE inflation, which is what the Fed looks at, is pretty much down at 2%, especially if you're looking at the 3-month or the 6-month number.
Yeah.
Unemployment, we just had a kind of wonky bad jobs report, largely because at least many analysts are saying because of the hurricanes that wiped out a lot of people's jobs.
And there were strikes going on across the country too, so a lot of those people weren't working, which obviously meant that there were less jobs getting created and all that.
Yes.
So yeah, the jobs report that showed there were only 12,000 jobs produced, that's not really, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's anomalous. The bottom line is Jerome Powell at the Fed thinks that risks to unemployment and to inflation are kind of balanced at this point. So yes, like Anthony was saying, they're kind of going down to a neutral rate. The much more interesting story that we've buried the lead on here is Powell's response to a question at his press conference about whether he would step down because of pressure from newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump, who has criticized Powell on the campaign trail in the past and said that he wouldn't reappoint him. The question was something like, just will you step down because of the new president? And Powell answers one word, no.
Which is exactly the job of a central banker to do, to not cave to any political pressure, to not listen to any political results. It is irrelevant to the job that the Federal Reserve has to do. The Federal Reserve has 2 mandates: full employment, keep inflation down. Their job is to utilize the best scientific knowledge that they have about monetary policy to make those 2 things as best as possible. And it is their job and their duty in their mandate to not be affected by the political winds of any major party.
Yes, they are to be driven by one thing and one thing only, and that is data. And in instances around the world where central banks have been influenced by politics, it can often go catastrophically wrong. The one that we always like to bring up is Turkey, where their president Erdogan decided, based kind of off of a religious view, that lower interest rates actually help lower inflation. And so he lowered interest rates and inflation was up over 100%.
The same thing happened in Argentina. When the political parties of Argentina captured the independence of their central banking system, they were able to print money instead of having to tax their population to pay for their spending, and then that's how Argentina has runaway inflation.
Yeah.
Right? That's actually one of the reasons where that Javier Milei of Argentina wants to tie the Argentinian peso to the US dollar, because he likes the idea of the Federal Reserve being totally separate from any political entity within the US government.
Yeah, because the Fed is actually a well-managed central bank.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm glad that Powell is standing up to the idea that it might become politicized, because he's right. He doesn't have to step down. It is not within, like, the president can't legally fire him before the end of his term.
Nope.
And so Powell's term ends in May of 2026, I believe. That gives him another year and a half before Trump could even consider kind of putting one of his cronies in who just listens to whatever he says to try to drive where interest rates are.
Yeah, and that's a nightmare, guys. That's a nightmare. And I think if you're politically on the right, if you're politically on the left, you do anywhere on the spectrum, you do not want a central bank that is going to be beholden to political interests. If that is where the United States goes, we will no longer have the stability in our currency or the stability in our markets that we have right now.
Yeah,
because every politician will want to prime the pump for themselves, lower interest rates when a time when they can benefit, and then higher interest rates in a time when their opponents may not benefit.
Yeah.
They will prime the pump for that.
I mean, I want to be somewhat pragmatic about it, because I think, like, we've just gone through a period where there's a ton of inflation, right? I think this would only have an effect on the margins. I don't think Trump, first of all, I think he's dumb, but like not dumb enough to just lower interest rates because he's like, let's fucking pump the economy, and that he won't realize that inflation will become a problem.
Okay.
I don't think he's that like disconnected from the reality of economics. Where it is going to be like, yeah, maybe we can juice inflation up to 4 or 5% and people won't notice because we don't have our right-wing media ecosystem like blaring how big of a problem it is, even though it will still kind of be painful to the consumer, in an attempt to kind of focus on other economic numbers and help in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, this is a part of a larger movement in conservatism that I drastically hate, and it's the non-professionalization of the government, right? And it's like we had this idea in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s that we were going to create, and in the 1910s even, that we were going to create a government that was going to hire experts and allow them to professionally manage certain aspects of the economy, about social issues that are able to be solved from a data-driven perspective.
Yes.
We were going to hand over certain things. We were going to hand over the regulation of food and drugs. We were going to hand over the regulation of monetary policy. We were going to hand over the regulation of a lot of national relation problems, national labor relation problems, over to these agencies that have a lot of background knowledge on these subjects that are not easy for politicians to just pick up and make policy around. The Trump era is threatening to undo all of that.
Yes. One of the things we talked about in our video reacting to Trump's election, which I highly recommend anyone on here go watch if you haven't seen it.
Definitely.
Is the concern about politics becoming unboring, becoming interesting. Politics, it's been a good thing that politics are boring because experts are in the positions of power in the executive branch, because they are running things in the way that they best see fit, and they're the ones who know the most about this. Jerome Powell is absolutely one of those experts. He is someone who is completely tuned into the data, who understands how the economy works and will respond to not only the signals that he gives with where his interest rates are, but also the signals that he gives at these press conferences. True. He knows how to change. He knows where interest rates should go and how to set expectations to manage inflation expectations. We don't want mob rule over something that is that kind of technically advanced.
Yes, the technical advanced part is really key here. It's this idea of keeping the whims of the partisan nature of politics away from these technical dials that require it requires immense amount of knowledge to be able to understand the differentiations between these different types of regulations. And it's important that we keep these entities separate from that partisan swing.
Yeah. So we are happy with Powell. We are happy that I don't know. I think it's going to be really hard legally for Trump to try to make inroads as far as affecting the Fed, especially if Powell has kind of his foot down on not being influenced. And I feel somewhat relieved in knowing that, and knowing his answer was kind of as blatant as it was.
Yeah, I am too.